It's time to measure the pressure-sensitive adhesive, or PSA veneer. We strongly recommend that you measure every front edge before you start cutting. This way you will have the whole cutting list in front of you. First, measure the height of every vertical piece of veneer, adding 1/4 of an inch to allow for trimming later on. Next, we need to measure the width of every piece and add 1 inch. This is because we will later be wrapping the veneer along the inside edge, as you can see here. If you have a 3-inch wide frame, you'll need to cut a 4-inch wide piece of veneer, so write 4 inches on your cut list. When you come across mullion pieces, remember that you'll need to wrap the veneer around both sides, so you'll need to add 2 inches. The same process applies for the horizontal piece. Measure the opening and add 1/4 of an inch to allow for trimming. For the width, do as we said for the vertical pieces. If the width is 1 inch, add another inch, making your cut 2 inches. If you would like, you can use our veneering cut list included in the support section of this DVD. Start with the tallest piece and write down its height in the height column. Then write down the different width of each piece with that height and note the quantity of each. Do the same for the various remaining heights. Before the gluing process, a very quick sanding on the surface will eliminate imperfections. To reface the front edges, we use a PSA veneer. The adhesive from this veneer begins curing once pressure is applied. On the surface where the veneer will be applied, water-based contact cement is used as an additional bonding agent between the veneer and the cabinet. This bond will be stronger and longer lasting than a typical iron-on veneer. We recommend that you use a water-based contact cement as the fumes will be minimal, making your job safer. Before working with any contact cement, we encourage you to read the instructions on the product label. At this point, apply the contact cement as shown, starting with the vertical front edges. Don't begin to work on the horizontal front edges until the veneer is applied and trimmed on every vertical edge. Be sure to apply contact cement where the veneer will wrap around the inside edge of the cabinet. The contact cement has to be left to dry for 15 to 30 minutes to become tacky in order to create the best possible bond. You usually have a timeline of about 3 to 4 hours to apply your veneer, so take your time and do a good job. If you don't make it in this time frame, just reapply the contact cement. It is important to give 2 coats of contact cement on rough surfaces if you notice that the first coat has been absorbed quickly. While the contact cement dries, you should work on cutting the veneer for your vertical front edges. When applying contact cement near a paneled surface, use a thin piece of cardboard or paper to keep the finished surface clean. If for any reason you need to clean up contact cement, simply rub it off once it is dried. Set up a work table to cut your veneer. We like to use MDF as this material grips the veneer and helps to keep the knife straight. Before you start cutting, take a look at your cut list. As we mentioned earlier, it's very important that you start with the bigger pieces, in this case, the vertical pantry pieces. Use the full length of your PSA sheet to cut for the pantry pieces. You will be able to trim the excess length when you are applying the veneer. We can now measure for the width of the piece. For this piece, we are measuring 2 inches width from the edge. Clamp your straight edge at 2 inches on one end. Then measure 2 inches on the other end of the straight edge and hold it firmly with your hand. To cut the veneer, begin by scoring the piece gently and slowly. Increase pressure with each score until the veneer piece breaks off. You are working with real wood veneer, so the knife will tend to follow the grain. This is why the first score is the most important, and you should focus on keeping the score straight rather than making a deep cut. Continue by pulling the veneer towards you and prepare for the second cut. The length of this piece will require 3 cuts. When you cut pieces for a full height pantry, cut 1 or 2 extra in the same size. This way you have a backup if you make a mistake. If you don't need them for the pantry, you can always use them for smaller cabinets. Before you begin cutting smaller pieces, use your full-length sheet to cut the veneer for the spacer between the cabinets and the bulkhead. Once the pantry is done, it's time to cut the pieces for the upper and lower cabinets. We will do the same as before. Measure and mark the full height and add extra to allow for trimming. In this case, we are adding 1 inch, but you can add whatever makes you feel comfortable. We usually cut 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch extra. Score, fold, and break apart. When this is done, continue cutting the strips of veneer from largest to smallest. Don't forget the extra 1/4 of an inch we added earlier. Keep the pieces organized. Separate the upper cabinet strips from the lower cabinet strips. When you apply the veneer on a vertical piece, we recommend starting from the top and working your way down, or for horizontals from left to right or vice versa. Never apply the veneer starting from the middle. When you start veneering, check your piece for cracks or imperfections. If you find any, you can place the flawed piece on the outside so it can be trimmed out later on, or replace it with a new one. To apply the veneer, peel off a little bit of the paper backing and attach the upper edge to the cabinet. Don't apply full pressure at this time. This way you have a little play to align the rest of the piece. Working from top to bottom, remove the backing 2 to 3 inches at a time. Take your time applying the piece and constantly check that you're veneering in a straight line. When you have a situation like this with a corner unit upper cabinet, your veneer must be cut very straight. If necessary, rescore the edge. When applying this piece, keep it tight against the other face, making sure it stays as straight as possible. Take your time, work your way from the inside out and down. You may find this to be a bit challenging, but once you've done it a few times, you'll get used to the process and it will become easier. Always check your pieces for cracks or imperfections. If you find any, place the flawed piece on the outside so it can be trimmed out later, or replace it with a new one.